Well now, good evening, friends. Andy Taylor here. What if I told you that people in Mayberry started noticing a painting in the town hall was changing? The sky getting bluer one day, the trees a different shade the next. And when I discovered who was secretly altering this beloved artwork night after night, the heartbreaking truth revealed a man's desperate battle to hold on to his identity as his memory slowly slipped away. This is a story about art and memory, about what we lose when our minds betray us, and about how a community can honor someone even as they're forgetting themselves. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1961 when Clara Edwards stopped by my office looking puzzled. "Sheriff Taylor," she said, "I need to ask you something that's going to sound strange. You know the Morrison landscape painting in the town hall? The one that's been there for 20 years? I nodded. Everyone in Mayberry knew that painting. It showed Myers Lake at sunset, with the old oak trees in the foreground and the mountains in the distance. Walter Morrison had painted it back in '41, and it had hung in the town hall council chamber ever since. A beloved piece of local art. Well, Clara continued, I could swear the colors in that painting are different than they used to be. The sky seems bluer, more vibrant. I thought maybe I was remembering it wrong. But then yesterday, I mentioned it to Mrs. Henderson, and she said she'd noticed the same thing. I assured Clara I'd look into it, though I suspected it was just a trick of memory or changing light in the room. But over the next week, 3 more people came to me with similar observations. Mayor Pike said the trees in the painting looked greener than he remembered. The janitor, Mr. Foster, said the water in the lake seemed to have more detail, more ripples than before. Miss Crump, who taught art for years, was the most specific. She came to my office with a concerned expression. "Sheriff," she said, "I've looked at that Morrison painting hundreds of times. I know every brushstroke. And I'm telling you, someone has been altering it. The technique is subtle, professional even, but those aren't the exact colors Walter Morrison used in '41. Someone is changing that painting. That got my attention. I went to the town hall and examined the painting carefully. It was a beautiful piece, about 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, oil on canvas, showing Myers Lake in autumn colors, with the sunset reflecting off the water. Without having seen it regularly over 20 years, I couldn't say for certain if it had changed, but Miss Crump's certainty was compelling. I called in Barney, who had a surprisingly good eye for detail despite his other quirks. Barney looked at the painting for a long time, then pointed to the sky. "Andy," he said, "I'm not an art expert, but doesn't that sky look freshly painted to you? The blue is almost too vivid, too new. Like someone touched it up recently." I arranged to have the painting examined by an art conservator from the State University. She came the following week and spent an hour studying it with various tools and magnifying glasses. "Sheriff Taylor," she said finally, "this painting has definitely been altered recently. I can see fresh paint layered over old paint in multiple areas. The sky, the trees, parts of the water. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The style matches the original work almost perfectly, but the paint is fresh, probably applied within the last few months. Small additions and changes done gradually over time. Someone has been methodically retouching this painting. But who would do that, and why?" I started investigating. The town hall was locked every evening at 6 and opened at 8 in the morning. Only a few people had keys. Mayor Pike, the janitor Mr. Foster, a couple of council members. I interviewed each one. None admitted to touching the painting. None had artistic training. I asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual in the building at night. Mr. Foster, the janitor, thought for a moment. Actually, he said, a couple of times in the past few months when I've come in early to clean, I've noticed things slightly out of place. The ladder from the storage room left in the hallway. A step stool near the painting. Once, I found the council chamber door unlocked when I was certain I'd locked it the night before. I thought maybe I was getting forgetful in my old age. This was starting to look like someone was breaking in specifically to alter the painting. But why? What would anyone gain from subtly changing a 20-year-old landscape? I decided to stake out the town hall at night. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, around midnight, I saw a light moving inside the building. I entered quietly through a back door and made my way to the council chamber. The light was coming from the painting area. Someone was there, standing on a step stool, painting my flashlight. "Sir," I said firmly, "step down from there and turn around." The figure startled, nearly dropping the flashlight, then slowly climbed down and turned to face me. I recognized him immediately. Walter Morrison, the artist who'd painted the original landscape 20 years ago. He was 75 now, white-haired and frail, still wearing paint-stained clothes. He looked at me with confusion and distress. "Sheriff," he said, "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here at night, but this painting needs fixing. It's not right. I can see the mistakes. I need to correct them." "Mr. Morrison," I said gently, "this is your painting. You created it 20 years ago." He looked at me blankly. 20 years ago? No. This painting is recent. Someone did it wrong. The colors aren't right. The composition is off. I need to fix it. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. I called Walter's daughter, Margaret Morrison, who I knew took care of him since his wife had passed. She arrived at the town hall 20 minutes later, clearly upset but not surprised. She looked at her father with profound sadness. "Sheriff," she said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was leaving the house at night. We've been dealing with this for about a year now. Dad has Alzheimer's disease. Early stages, but progressing. His memory comes and goes. Sometimes he knows exactly who he is and who we are. Other times, he's lost in the past or can't remember what he did 5 minutes ago. And always, he's focused on his art." Margaret explained that Walter had been a respected painter for 40 years, known throughout the region for his landscapes. His work hung in homes and public buildings across 3 counties. The Myers Lake painting in the town hall was considered his masterpiece, the piece he was most proud of. But now, in his declining mental state, he didn't remember creating it. When he looked at it, all he saw were perceived flaws that needed correction. So he'd been secretly coming to the town hall at night, using a key he'd somehow kept from decades ago when he'd been on the town council, and touching up what he believed was someone else's flawed work. He was trying to fix his own masterpiece because he no longer recognized it as his own. The heartbreak of that realization settled over me like a weight. Here was a man who'd spent his life creating beauty, whose identity was intimately tied to his art, and now his own mind wouldn't let him remember his greatest achievement. Margaret wiped away tears. "The worst part," she said, "is that when he's lucid and I tell him about these episodes, he's devastated. He knows his mind is failing. He knows he's losing himself piece by piece. The painting, his art, it's the last thing he's holding on to. But even that's slipping away. Sometimes I find him in his studio at home, staring at his old paintings, not recognizing them as his own work. Other times, he'll look at something he painted last week and swear he's never seen it before. We helped Walter home that night. He was confused, asking repeatedly why we were at the town hall so late, why I was there, what was happening with the painting. Margaret handled him with practiced patience, reassuring him gently, even as her own heart was breaking. The next day, I called a meeting with Mayor Pike and the town council to discuss the situation. Some council members were upset about the painting being altered. "It's a valuable piece," one said. "We can't have it damaged, even by the original artist. That feels disrespectful to the work." But others were more compassionate. "How can we be upset with Walter Morrison?" Another asked. "He gave us that painting. He's decorated this whole town with his art for decades. If his mind is failing, and this gives him some purpose, some connection to who he used to be, how can we deny him that?" We debated for hours. The practical arguments were clear. The painting was town property. It was being altered without permission. We needed to protect it. But the human arguments were equally compelling. Walter Morrison wasn't a vandal. He was a sick man trying desperately to hold on to his identity through the only means he had left. In the end, we reached a compromise. We would have the painting professionally photographed and documented in its current altered state. Then we would allow Walter, under supervision if his daughter agreed, to continue his work on it if that's what he needed to do. The painting would become not just a landscape of Myers Lake, but a document of a man's relationship with his own fading memory. Margaret was moved by the town's compassion, but worried. "I don't know if supervised visits would work," she said. "When Dad's in that state where he doesn't remember creating the painting, having people watch him might agitate him. He'd feel like we were judging his work. And honestly, Sheriff, I don't know how much longer he'll be able to paint at all. His hands are starting to shake. His vision is declining. The Alzheimer's is progressive. We're losing him bit by bit." What she said next broke my heart. Sometimes, she continued, I find him crying in his studio. On his lucid days, when he realizes what's happening to him, when he understands that his memories are disappearing and his ability to create is fading, he mourns. He told me last week that losing his art feels like losing his soul. I visited Walter at his home a week later during one of his lucid periods. He remembered me, remembered the night at the town hall, and was deeply embarrassed. "Sheriff Taylor," he said, "I'm so sorry for the trouble I've caused. I know I shouldn't have been there. I know I painted that landscape 20 years ago. When I'm thinking clearly, I remember every brushstroke. But there are hours, sometimes days, when I look at my own work and don't recognize it. My mind tells me it's wrong, that it needs fixing. I can't explain it. It's like looking at a stranger's attempt to paint my thoughts. The colors feel wrong, even though I know intellectually they're the colors I chose. It's terrifying to not trust your own perception, to not remember your own creations." We talked for a long time about art and memory and identity. Walter told me that he'd always believed his paintings were his legacy, the part of himself that would outlive his body. Now, facing a disease that was erasing his memories, he was confronting a different kind of death. Not physical, but a dissolution of self. "Who am I," he asked, "if I can't remember my own life, my own work?" If I look at a painting I spent weeks creating and see only flaws that need correcting, the painting hasn't changed, but I have. My perception has changed. And that's more frightening than dying because I'm disappearing while still alive. The town council's compromise was never really implemented because Walter's condition deteriorated rapidly over the following months. Within weeks, he could no longer hold a brush steady enough to paint. His lucid moments became rarer. Margaret eventually had to move him to a care facility where he could receive proper medical attention. The Myers Lake painting remained in the town hall, altered by its own creator in his final attempts to perfect what he no longer remembered perfecting decades before. We left it as it was, a testament not just to natural beauty, but to human fragility and the cruel tricks our minds can play on us. I visited Walter once more before he stopped recognizing visitors entirely. He was sitting in his room at the care facility, staring at a blank canvas that Margaret had placed on an easel, hoping it might bring him comfort. He didn't remember who I was, but he was calm, peaceful even. He looked at the blank canvas and smiled slightly. "I'm going to paint something beautiful," he said to no one in particular. "A lake at sunset, mountains in the distance. I can see it so clearly in my mind." I nodded, even though we both knew he could no longer paint, even though his hands trembled too much to hold a brush, even though the image in his mind might disappear before he could even try to capture it. Walter Morrison passed away in the spring of '62. About 6 months after that night, I found him retouching his masterpiece. At his funeral, the town hall was filled with his paintings, borrowed from homes and buildings all over the county. People spoke about his talent, his dedication to capturing the beauty of our region, his generosity in sharing his gift with the community. Margaret thanked everyone for their kindness in those final difficult months. She specifically thanked the town council for their understanding about the painting, for recognizing that her father's alterations weren't vandalism, but a desperate attempt to hold on to himself. After the funeral, there was discussion about what to do with the Myers Lake painting. Some suggested having it professionally restored to its original 41 state, erasing Walter's final touches. But Margaret, supported by most of the community, argued for leaving it as it was. "Those last alterations," she said, "are as much a part of my father's story as the original brushstrokes. They represent his lifelong commitment to his art, his inability to ever see his work as complete, and ultimately, his tragic struggle with a disease that took everything from him. To erase those marks would be to pretend the last year of his life didn't happen. And however painful it was, it did happen. It was real. He was real, even in his confusion and loss. The painting remains in the town hall to this day, a landscape that's both beautiful and heartbreaking. Tour guides who show visitors through the building tell Walter Morrison's story, explaining that if you look closely, you can see layers of paint, different shades in the sky and trees, evidence of an artist who painted the same scene twice, 20 years apart. Unable to remember he'd already captured that sunset perfectly the first time. It's become a conversation piece about memory and identity, about what we lose when our minds betray us, and about how communities can honor people even in their decline. The experience changed how I thought about identity and memory. We often think of ourselves as the sum of our memories, our experiences, our creations. But what happens when those memories disappear? Is Walter Morrison any less himself because he couldn't remember painting his masterpiece? Is his legacy diminished because his mind failed before his body did? I don't think so. His art speaks for him. His paintings carry his vision, even when he couldn't remember having that vision. The beauty he created outlasted his ability to remember creating it, and in that way, he achieved a kind of immortality that even Alzheimer's couldn't touch. Well, now, that's the story of the painting that changed colors, of an artist who altered his own masterpiece because his failing mind wouldn't let him recognize it as his own, and of a community that chose compassion over preservation. It's a reminder that the cruelest losses aren't always physical, but mental. That watching someone forget themselves is a unique kind of grief, and that there's dignity in honoring people's struggles, even when those struggles seem futile or confusing. If you know someone dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia, remember Walter Morrison. Remember that the person is still there, even when the memories aren't. Remember that their past achievements don't disappear just because they can't remember achieving them. And remember that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let people hold on to their identity however they can, even if that means letting them alter their own masterpieces in the dark of night, desperately trying to fix something that was never broken. Come back and visit again real soon, friends. Until then, this is Andy Taylor saying goodnight from Mayberry. Remember, we are more than our memories, and the beauty we create in the world outlasts our ability to remember creating it. Take care now.